to Real Talk with Pastor Rick. I am excited to hang out with my pastor, Pastor Rick, and I'm excited about this podcast because we are going to talk about how do we take our faith from Sunday to every day. Pastor Rick, before we get into today's subject matter, I want to ask you, what are your hopes for the podcast? What do you want to see accomplished here? What do you want our audience to walk away with?
Yeah, this is it's exciting because we've seen a need for this for multiple years, right? People have been asking about just little bits and pieces here and just in the various communities that I'm engaged with, whether it's pastor friends and colleagues or church plants and builds, marriages and all of that. It's just this conglomerate of communities and they all have questions.
Yeah.
And I don't have all the answers. Jesus does. I don't have all the answers. I share some of my experiences. I share some of the things that work for me. It may not work for everybody, but I share some of the things based on biblical principles and the need to put that together in some kind of informal format such as this, I think would be a blessing to multiple communities of people. I'm excited about it.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And as I think about, how many times have you walked away from a sermon and said, I wish I could have added this. I wish I could have.
Every Sunday.
Yeah.
Every Sunday I walk away and I go, oh, I missed this. Oh, I forgot to mention that. Oh, man, it would have been good if I added this. I do it every Sunday.
And I imagine, I don't preach regularly like you do. And so I imagine that as you preach the word, you're getting text messages, phone calls, emails, conversations throughout the week off of the content from Sunday. So I'm excited just to have a space where we can just, host those questions. And so if you're watching this, we just want to encourage you, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. We would love to get your questions as well. So if you want to DM us on social media, if you want to leave a comment with questions, we're going to engage with our audience as well. And so before we get to questions, before we get into subject matters, we'll do that in future episodes. I really wanted the people to get to know the man behind the message. And so, Pastor Rick, can we talk about your story, your testimony? And maybe we could start with, where were you born?
Brooklyn. I'm a Brooklyn kid, born and raised. Some people say they can still hear the accent.
Oh, it's there.
Is it there?
Oh, yeah.
I thought I lost it by now. No?
I can hear it.
Some words, I've been told some words I say it's very clear that I'm from Brooklyn.
Yes.
And then others not.
Water. Water.
But I've been in scenarios where I've talked with people or interviewed for jobs. And, because I've moved around a lot and I've traveled and was in the military and that's what took me in travels, I felt like I kind of lost the accent. And so I would talk to people on the phone for months or years and they would see me and they would go, are you the person I talked to on the phone? Because you don't look like the person that I talked to on the phone. So I don't look the way that I sound over the years. But I'm a Brooklyn kid, born and raised. I love Brooklyn. It is the heart of America as far as I'm concerned. There's no place that makes pizza better.
Wow.
And there's people out there, Chicagoans are going to go,
I try to tell them.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm a Brooklyn kid, born and raised. Still have some family back there that I'm actually looking to move forward here, to move to Texas here sometime this year.
So did you grow up rich? That bread in your pocket?
I don't even know if I can spell that word.
You're so broke.
We're so broke. It's we're so poor we couldn't pay attention. It was just crazy. But we didn't know we were poor, and that was the aspect about being poor, is that we didn't know.
Just define what poverty looked like for you growing up, because so many people that are listening may not know.
Poverty looked like for us moving from apartment to apartment, being evicted out of some apartments. I remember my brother and I we would take rice and we would take mayonnaise and ketchup and stir it, and that was what we ate.
Wow. And
we were very satisfied with that because we didn't know any better. I remember a treat for us was a Hostess pie. It was about 20 cents. And when my mother would bring those home on rare occasions, it was literally a treat. We would take it and cut it into pieces because we didn't want to eat it all at one time. So I mean, in today's society, people would look at that and they may not consider that poor, but I sure did.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my grandmother bringing us food,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I remember my parents were always the kind of people that even though we had nothing, they freely gave of the
Wow.
nothing that they had.
Wow.
And I think that was a principle that at the time we didn't know or understand, but now looking back at it, that was a principle that kind of kept us alive, so to speak, because we always had people giving into us because we always gave.
What was it like in the household? The culture, the temperature of the home. What were your parents like? What was it like with your siblings?
Yeah, have one brother who went to be with the Lord about 5, 6 years ago. Phenomenal pastor. Um, people say that I'm good with people. I could not put a light to my brother. 1,000 times better with people. He had a small church, but he had a 6,000 person funeral.
My
Um,
goodness.
just so impactful. So in the house, it was my brother and I. We always lived in an apartment. We never owned our own home. We never owned, a new car or anything of that nature. Mom went to work. Dad went to work on occasion because he was a gout sufferer. So when his gout flared up, he was home. When his gout went away, and the great thing about it, and when I think about it, is he always had a job. He would always go and get another job. The job would fire him because he couldn't come to work because he couldn't walk. So after a week or two, they'd fire him. And after about 3 weeks, when his gout would subside, he'd go back and he'd get another job. He drove truck, school bus, tractor trailer. So I learned to drive a tractor trailer before I learned to drive a car. He used to take me, over the road with him, and he would take me into a big parking lot or something like that, and he'd teach me how to switch gears and how to double clutch and all that. So I learned school bus, and then when I got in the car, it was easy. It was nothing. So that's what at home looked like. Mom came home. She worked in the hospital. She's retired from the city, and she worked in the as an OR tech and a GI tech. And so she was the steady, there bringing home a check every 2 weeks. She was the steady. And then when dad was working, he would add on to it. And remember that atmosphere that my dad wanted to create for us. It was just my brother and I. And I remember one day he came home and he had got paid. It was on a Friday. And he was the giving type. He wanted to give everything to my mother and everything to the boys, and my brother and I. And I'll never forget, he came home one day and it was a good day. It was a good Friday because he got paid. And he came home and we stood in the foyer and he took out, everything was cash back then. There was no direct deposit. You got a check and you went to the check cashing place and you cashed it. So you come home with a wad like this. And I remember he came in and we stood in the foyer and he threw it up in the air. He just let us go for it, And that was his heart.
Yeah.
Wanting to supply and provide for his family. And to see us smile was big for him. That was life for us. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of food.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of music. My dad was in the music. Yeah, he was in his R&B. He was in his oldie. So I grew up with 60s music, the Drifters and Sam Cooke. And even till this day, that's my music. When I get to a place where I want to listen to some oldies, listen to some music, I go back and I pull Sam Cooke or some of that old stuff that my father used to play. And we didn't have a lot, but we had a lot of family time.
Mm.
Fridays was family time. We would have uncles and aunts from out of town, from Philly. They would come and we would all get around and we would just party. We didn't have money, but we had music.
Right.
And so my father would play his stereo. He had nice stereo system and he would play his stereo, and the adults would dance. The kids would just sit around and kind of watch, because we couldn't get into adult business during that time. You don't get into adult business, but we would just watch and we would, it just became a part of us. And so that's what home looked like for us.
What about spiritually? What was it like?
Didn't have a big spiritual family. Didn't come from a family of people that were saved. It was funny because my godfather was a bishop in the Orthodox Coptic Church. And it was a house church. It was literally a house church. It was a brownstone that was gutted on the second floor, and it had some pews there. It seated about 35 people. It was as big as the church could seat. Had a small altar that was built in there, and he was the bishop of the Orthodox Coptic Church. And because it was my godfather, that's where we went. So, surprisingly, my mother and father didn't necessarily go to church every Sunday, but we had to go. So we went every Sunday. And so there was no argument, there was no choice, there was no option. This is what you did on Sunday morning. You got up and you went to church. And if you know anything about the Orthodox Coptic Church, it was almost a combination of Catholicism and Christianity.
Right.
So I was an altar boy, and I carried the cross up the aisle. Sometimes I carried the incense and so forth like that. So that's what kind of church looked like. We were in scouting. That was big for us. That was probably the thing that kept us off the streets and kept us out of trouble.
What does that look like? What is scouting?
Boy Scouts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Boy Scouts. My father was a scoutmaster. My brother and I were both scouts. I started in scouting when I was about 6.5, 7 years old. And from 7 till 17,
wow,
I was in scouting. And it did good for me. It, for a kid growing up in the ghetto that didn't have anything, just exposed me to some things that I probably would not have known.
So growing up in the church, but in a household that was not committed to Jesus or the way of Jesus, how did you process a relationship with God? What was your view of God growing up?
Yeah, it probably wasn't until I didn't have, growing up and coming up in the Coptic church, that was when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, in the very young years. And at that point, for most of us, it's just a formality. Right? Well, I'm just going to do this because my parents told me I had to do it. And we would go to church with my grandmother, right? My grandmother lived across the street, and we would all go together, and she would bring us back home together. It probably wasn't until I was a teenager and was meeting other people, especially in our scouting troop. I met some good friends that we're friends till today. We're the best of friends till today and talk to each other at least somewhere around once a quarter. And going to high school, met a bunch of people that were from different churches and started going to other churches and started visiting around and seeing that there was another side of what I knew coming from the Coptic church. There was a whole other side, and it was different in worship. And so my intake, of course, very young, was the emotional side of church. It's very emotional. There's a lot of singing. There's a lot of praising. There's a lot of hand clapping. There's a lot of dancing. It was just this release of the tension of time. Maybe didn't even realize it was the release of being poor.
Right.
And people came together. There was a lot of unity. There was a lot of love. There was a lot of release. But in all honesty, looking back at it, me personally, and I can't speak for everybody that was there, but for me personally, I didn't have a good grip on Christ. I was in love with the church. I wasn't in love with Christ. And I would venture to say the people that I've met over the years, a lot of them fall into that category where, I love church. And I love church and the unity and the love and the fellowship and the people, the chicken dinners, the fellowship, basketball after service behind the church, loved the girls that were in the church, loved all of that, but didn't love Christ. And so I think from a Christ-centric perspective, there was something lacking there, at least in my life. And that might not be for everybody, but at least in mine.
Okay. So then you became a teenager. You're preparing for your final years. What were the final years of high school looking like for you? What, academically, spiritually?
Went to a great high school, Brooklyn Tech, all the tech nights out there.
What?
Went to Brooklyn Tech. Brooklyn Tech at the time was number 6 in the nation.
Dang.
It was still one of the best high schools in America, 13 stories high. Took up a whole block. It was a huge high school. We had our own radio station, our own pool. We had everything. Had to test to get in. It was a specialized high school. Now I heard they have more specialized high schools, but it was a specialized high school. And getting ready to graduate, didn't graduate.
Why?
Didn't graduate. hanging out with the wrong crowd. We didn't do anything wrong. We didn't steal. We didn't rob anybody. I just didn't go to class.
You would just skip.
I was just skipping class.
Doing what?
Hanging out.
Just chilling.
Just chilling. But I wasn't going to class.
Were you smoking the weed?
Wasn't smoking the weed. Didn't do anything. Wasn't doing anything.
Yeah.
Wasn't smoking. Wasn't drinking. Wasn't doing anything wrong other than just wasn't going to class. So I remember when they finally caught up to me, it took them a while to catch up to me. When they finally caught up to me, and the guidance counselor says, listen, you're ruining your life. Right? You're ruining your life. You could either go to a regular high school and you'll graduate in a couple of months, or you can take your GED. Which one you want to do?
Dang.
So I said, well, I'll just take my GED. So I took my GED. I don't know, 4 or 6 weeks go by. They call me back in the office. I says, well, we got the results of your GED. I'm sitting at the guidance counselor's small office, sitting at the desk. I'm sitting right there. He takes the paper and he throws it in my face.
What?
Yeah.
I got arrested in today's world.
I am. Today's world has been different. And he said, look at your test. Open it, you know. And so I open it up, and there's my GED scores. He says, nobody maxes the GED. You almost maxed the GED. You're wasting your life. And he called me Richard. Nobody calls me Richard.
Your government name?
Yeah, my government name. He says, Richard, you're wasting your life, you know. And so I left there, and I went into the military. It's probably one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Which branch?
Army.
Thank you for your Army. Thank you for your service.
You're welcome. Just took me to places that I probably, if it wasn't for the military, would have never been. Wow.
Talk about that.
Lived overseas. Wound up spending, and I remember the recruiter was gotta back up a bit,
okay,
and just tell the story how I even got to the military while I was skipping class.
Okay, yeah, explain that.
The guards would, come in the hallway, and they would do what's called a sweep, and they would come up the steps and come to the center, and they would sweep you up. You couldn't go anywhere because they would each take a staircase and come to the center and sweep you up. I don't know how, but I always had a way of getting around the sweep. So I'm hearing, it was me and a buddy. We're hearing the walkie-talkies, coming up, they're coming up the steps. So, man, we're in a sweep. We're in a sweep. So we're running down the hallway. I ducked into a classroom, and I just sat down. I went in the classroom. I sat down. And
were there people in there?
Yeah, there were people in there. People in there. Teacher was in there. I just ran in. I sat down. The lady came. She gave me a piece of paper and a pencil. So it was a test. So I just started taking the test. Right. A couple of weeks later, I come home and my mother said, "What'd you do?" I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What'd you do?" I said, "I didn't do nothing." She says, "The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines have been calling this house.
They're looking for you.
They're looking for you." She said, "What did you do?" I didn't know the test I took was the ASVAB test.
Wow.
To get into the military. So I'm running to get away from the guards. And I run in the classroom just to take this test. They took that test and they took my results, and I had scored really high. So all the branches of service were calling me. I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going there. But the Army was persistent. They called me 18 times.
Jeez. Is that good?
They were persistent. And they said, look, we don't want to talk to you. Just come down. I want you to watch this film. Come down and watch this film. That's all I want you to do. So I come down and watch the film, and they just slowly, and they finally got me after 18 calls and multiple calls after that and so forth like that. And recruiter said, listen, if you sign up for 4 years, you do 4 years, I'll give you $3,000, which at that time, that's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of money for an 18-year-old kid, 17-year-old kid.
You grew up poor, yeah.
Oh, yeah, back in the late 70s, early 80s. And I said, no way. No way will I be in the military for 4 years. You couldn't. I'm not. I'm going to do my 3 years and I'm getting out. 20 years later, I'm still there.
Wow.
And
what's your position?
In the military?
Yeah.
So I was a satellite technician. And when I got out, I was a sergeant first class.
Wow.
And I had no intentions of being in that long. But I think, the point of the story here is sometimes God has other plans that you don't have.
I think let's talk about that first. Just a little second.
Yeah.
The providence of God.
Yeah.
What would that mean to somebody who's listening or watching?
Oh, man. Looking back at what had happened and not even having a strong relationship with God. God, when we read in the Bible and it talks about God having a plan for our lives, He does. And it's filled with grace and it's filled with favor because who am I that He would favor me? What makes me different than somebody else? But I saw the plan when I look back over my life and say, wow, so much has changed. God has graced me and gifted me and favored me in areas that, to be honest with you, I don't feel like I deserve. I feel like, God, I'm no different than the guy up the street. And he's doing really good and he's trying really hard and he's working really hard. Why don't you favor him and grace him? And so the providence of God just kind of took over. And I went in the military and traveled. I lived overseas. I lived in Korea for a couple of years. I lived in Japan for 7 years. Did all kind of projects in Japan, mainland Japan, Thailand, just in all different places. Spent 12 years in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Right? Or the last 7 in the military and then 5 outside the military in Hawaii. And the great thing about it was that in each one of those places, started a church.
I want to talk about salvation.
Mm.
When did God go from being, or when did you go from church being a routine to God being your God?
Yeah. When I left Brooklyn, New York, I thought I had a relationship with God.
Okay.
Because I was attending church. At the time, we used to have these big boom boxes that took 8D batteries that you used to put on your shoulder, And
I wouldn't know.
You should.
iPod.
Salvation, at least for me and my peers, was, man, you had your boom box, but you didn't play no secular music. You only play gospel music. Secular music was a no-no. You only play gospel music, And so there was a lot of external things that we did. What we listened to, the way we dressed,
Yeah.
what we watched, boys and girls didn't go to the swimming pool together. You weren't allowed to go to the movies. It was just all these external things. When I left and I went into the military, now I'm away from the church.
Okay.
And when I'm away from the church, I realized that I didn't have all of the nuggets and the tools that I needed to live a successful, victorious Christian life away from the church. And you think about it, Jesus had the disciples and he walked with them for 3.5 years, and then he sent them out.
Right.
So now here is my quote unquote sending, and I'm not prepared.
What made you realize you're not equipped?
What made me realize was that all of the ways that I was living when I was back home, I couldn't continue to live that way. I couldn't sustain it.
What were you doing?
Everything that I wasn't supposed to do.
Really?
Yeah. I couldn't sustain the lifestyle. I couldn't sustain the lifestyle of Christ, and I use it in quotes, that I thought I was sustaining back home when I was at home and in church every Sunday, and we were in church all week long. I couldn't sustain that. Now that I'm out here in the world and I'm getting battled with all of these life issues. Clubs,
Wow.
girls,
Wow.
drugs,
Wow.
alcohol, all of this. I'm in the Army. Anything goes.
Really?
Almost. Yeah, anything goes. And so I'm out here, and I tried. I went through basic training, and I remember going through basic training. And, basic training is basic training. Military is the military. Drill sergeant comes up and he, curse you out. Get down on the floor, blah, 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 blah. That kind of stuff. And it was normal.
Right.
And I was like, hey, I was telling all my squad members, don't curse around me because I'm Christian. Right. They were like, okay, man, he's Christian. Don't, I don't want to hear no profanity. Don't curse around me. I don't do that. Well, that lasted for about 8 weeks.
Okay.
12 weeks.
That's not bad.
And then when I got out of basic training and I went to what we called advanced individual training, that's when you learn your skill. And that was really a freebie. Basic, they had control over you. They controlled every minute of your day. But when you went to AIT, you're on your own. Okay. School is from 8 to 4. You got to be there, but the rest of the time is yours. And that's where I went, wow.
Really? Partying, clubbing, drugs, drinking, women.
I wasn't a drugger.
Okay.
And I wasn't a drinker.
Okay.
I like to go out and I like to party. But I wasn't big into drugs. I wasn't big into drinking.
Any conviction? Anything going on inside of you?
Oh, absolutely. Because
Okay.
I'm going, man, the things that I'm feeling
Right.
and what I'm liking is all the things that I learned in church that I'm not supposed to like
Okay.
and I'm not supposed to feel. And so there was a battle there. And of course, I lost, right? The world, the people around me. I'm not around Christians anymore. I'm just around soldiers,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I'm around men and women,
Right.
right? So now I've just got all this freedom and all this liberty. And I just ran with it. I just did everything that I wasn't supposed to do, plus some.
You didn't go to church?
Didn't go to church. I remember in basic training, the only reason why I went to church was because it got me out of work.
They always do.
They give you an hour. So
Yeah.
you got an hour to go to church. Well, man, that's an hour less that I have to work because we work there every day. They working you to death.
Right.
But if I went to church, I didn't have to work for that hour. It was about an hour, hour and a half. So I would go to church for that, but it wasn't the same as me going to church back home.
Right.
It was just totally different. And so for years,
wow,
for years, I'm just slowly drifting. The funny part about it is during that drifting time, I remember there were times that, especially when I was in Japan, there were times that I'd be playing my music real loud in my car. Now, this is back in the 80s.
Okay.
I had over $3,000 worth of system in my car.
How much was your car worth?
It probably wasn't worse than $3,000.
You had more money in your stereo than your car.
I did.
That's how you know you grew up broke.
The music, right? You can hear me 5 blocks away.
Right.
I'm surprised I have ears today, right? But I remember there was just something in me that when I would go by a church, I turned my music off.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That is very
And I
interesting.
didn't know
Yeah.
why, other than something in me
Right.
just said you can't play that by the church.
Because God's omnipresent.
Yeah.
Right? So like he heard you down the road.
I know. But there was some connection to the church.
Yeah.
So when I would if I was going down a block and I saw a church, I turned my music off.
Yeah.
And when I go by the church, I turn it back on.
I think I know myself, I know others that are listening and watching right now. Man, we have those ticks.
Mm-hmm.
We have those instincts, especially those that may be far from God even now.
Mm-hmm.
That are listening, that when they pass by a church or whenever they're in a context of maybe a wedding or a funeral where church or spirituality kind of gets brought up, with something kind of, what is that? What is that thing inside of us that makes us do weird things like that?
Yeah.
Spirituality.
I think that God is always pursuing us in some way. And it's those little ticks and taps that are little reminders to us that, number one, he's still there, but there's a place that we need to be, that he wants us to be, that we're not at that moment.
Okay.
And so we get those things because God he's always pursuing us. He wants us to be back with him in the place where he wants us to be. And I think those are little reminders.
So you're experiencing that.
I was experiencing and there was some conviction in me, but I would just keep tossing it away because I wanted to have fun.
Right.
I wanted to have fun. And so I went through years of that, just years of just doing my own thing. Never did anything really wrong.
Okay.
I mean, there was a couple of things I did was wrong, but I mean, nothing major. It wasn't nothing that sent me to jail.
Yeah.
Nothing that was criminal. Then I met my wife.
Okay.
Who, of course, she wasn't my wife at the time, but when I saw her, I said, "Man,
where'd you see her?"
That girl. So I was in Japan. She was in Japan. She was working, and I saw her, and I said, "I don't know, just something that I had never looked at a woman and said, man, I want to be with that woman, like I wanted to be with her."
Wow.
And was too afraid to even say anything.
Were you a shy person?
Very much so.
Okay.
Right. I'm an introvert.
Okay.
Even now, I'm still an introvert, believe it or not. Right. I know we're talking on this cast, but I'm still an introvert.
Yeah.
And I don't know what made me. It was just, I guess, that desire or just wanting, that curiosity that made me begin to pursue her. in just the littlest ways. But man, I was shy. I was scared. I looked at her and I said, I don't think I could ever be with a woman. I could ever date a woman like this. Right. I just thought that she was beautiful. I still think she's beautiful. Um, and so uh, somehow I got the energy to do it. And she was a believer.
Okay. So you walked up to her?
I walked up to her. We had a little conversation. She didn't like me.
Oh no.
No.
What happened? What'd you do?
She didn't like me. Of course, she was being courteous. She was being kind. Um, after a couple of times I asked her out. Um, she said yes. I said, "Can I take you to lunch?" She says, "Okay," but she didn't show. Right.
Dang.
So I can kind of tell she really didn't like me.
And what's the dynamic like? Because you're an American in Japan. Her ethnicity, her background?
Filipino.
Okay.
She's a Filipino.
She's not
from
a
the
soldier.
Philippines. She's not a soldier.
Okay.
And so she didn't show up. But later on, I found out when we did talk and, we did finally, I saw her the next time. She says, "Yeah, I didn't come, but I watched you."
She was stalking you.
So she was standing across the street and she saw me pull up in my car and get out and wait. And she watched me. I guess she just wanted to see if I was serious. I don't know what the situation was. And so I just felt I was very disappointed that day because I was so excited. I'm so excited. I'm gonna take her to lunch. Just. But then afterwards, we got back together. We talked again, and I tried it again, and she showed up a second time. And this relationship just went on in a couple of years. We wound up getting married. She was a believer. The first gift I gave her. Now, during this time, I wasn't living as a believer, but she was.
Okay.
And because I knew she was a believer, and I had been in church, the first gift I ever gave her was a Bible.
So you knew what to do.
I knew exactly what
you
to
knew
do.
what to say.
I knew what to do, what to say, I knew the language.
Right.
And after a couple of years, she went back to the Philippines, so I'm all alone. We're separated. When we got married a couple of years later, and we're living together in a little 1-bedroom bungalow. I never forget. We had no furniture. We had stereo because I had my stereo system. Yes, we had stereo. Well, that was in the car. But I had another several $1,000s of actual stereo.
Oh my gosh.
With speakers this high and the whole 9 yards. It was living in Japan, so I had the best of the stuff. I had the best of the best. That's where they make the best equipment. My turntable back then was $1,200.
You had a
This was back in the
turntable?
'80s. Yes. Just imagine in the '80s spending $1,200 on a turntable. So had all this equipment, but we had no furniture to sit on. Well, we had just got married, so we had to build, we had to save. And I remember she said to me, she says, "I'm going to church. Let's go." I said, "Church?
Oh man.
I'm not going to church. I'll be here. I'll stay here and watch a little TV, but I'll be here when you get back." She said, "Okay." So she left and she went to church. She came back. And during the week, we had no kids, just us. She jokingly, we were in the kitchen, jokingly, she said to me, she says, "Church is Sunday. If you don't come with me, you can't touch me."
Dang. It's like that.
I mean, it was a joke. We laughed about it. We were in the kitchen, we laughed about it. But I didn't want to take no chances.
Amen.
So that Sunday, I went to church. And I never forget where I was sitting. I was sitting 7 rows back from the front on the end, the right side on the aisle, right along the aisle. The wall was white. I never forget it was like yesterday. And I'm sitting there and I felt so strongly. And I'm not one to say, God told me this, God told me that. I think people sometimes use that too haphazardly. And I heard the Lord say, "Welcome back.
Wow.
I've been waiting for you.
Wow.
This is where you belong." Wow. I heard that so clear. And the journey started from there. Just a walk with Christ and learning and growing and developing, and got with a small group of about 4 or 5 people, and we started that first church.
In Japan.
In Japan. And the pastor's name was Dennis Roundtree. And he had preached at the church that we had attended one Sunday, and I really liked his preaching. And I contacted him. I don't know how. This was the day before cell phones and
Hmm.
YouTube and internet and all of that.
How did y'all survive?
We made it, and we actually did very well.
That's actually
And anyway, we got together and we started. That was the first church we started in Japan, and then the journey just went on from there. And then we were married. We started having kids, and we left Japan and we went to Ohio. I think it was Ohio. Yeah, I think we was in Ohio. I'm in the military, so I'm getting stationed in different places. And I remember being in Ohio, in a small town, suburbs of Cincinnati. And I'm coming out of the 7-Eleven. I was looking for an apartment. And the gentleman walks up to me and he says, I heard you're looking for an apartment. I heard you talking to the lady at the register that you're looking for an apartment. I said, yeah, just moved here. We're staying in a hotel. He says, you see that street right there? I said, yeah. He says, you can't live over there. No blacks allowed.
wow.
Yeah. So went through the phases. And even when I checked into my unit, um, I was briefed. Wood, you're not allowed to travel in the area by yourself.
This is the suburbs of
This is
Cincinnati.
the suburbs of Cincinnati.
What decade?
This was 1992.
Look at the 90s. Jeez.
Yeah, 92.
Was this your first visceral encounter with racism? I'm sure you've seen
No.
it growing up, but
It was the second when I was in Korea, 1982. Went into the city of Seoul where most Americans don't go. Day off on the weekends. I'm traveling, just going around. And a Korean woman comes up behind me. She grabs my butt. And what do you do? I didn't know what to do. She grabbed my butt. She stopped and she looked at me. And she turned around and walked away. I went back to work 2 days later. I asked my Korean counterpart, my Korean coworker, older gentleman, and I said, hey, this happened to me. And he said, yeah. He says, we were taught that African Americans have tails like monkeys. She was just checking for your tail.
are you serious?
Yeah. So that was my second. The incident in Ohio was my second batch with racism. But I was shocked because this is in the 90s.
Right.
My wife was actually pregnant with Ricky. You know Ricky, my son. And this was in the 90s, and I'm in uniform.
Right.
So I mean, I'm in the military. I'm serving my country, coming out of the 7-Eleven in this real small town. And the guy says, you can't live on the other side of that street. No blacks allowed. And when I got briefed at the unit, they told me where we used to go to get fuel for our vehicles, I could not go and get fuel on my own. And even the attendant at the gas station, older white gentleman, was a believer. When he found out I was a believer, he used to talk to me all the time, but he told me, he said, Rick, don't ever come here by yourself. The street where his gas station on was the street in which one of the very high officials of the Ku Klux Klan lived, right on that street. He said, don't ever come here by yourself. So it was really kind of a shocker to me.
Yeah.
Of course, growing up in Brooklyn, where, you get to see or hear any of that. But we never had any issues.
Okay.
And all was good.
So you went to Ohio. Then where'd you go after that?
We stayed a couple of years in Ohio. Was a part of a church in Ohio that was an hour away. We traveled an hour, highway driving hour, back and forth to church in a town called Lynchburg.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it was a reason why they called it Lynchburg. The church was literally in a cornfield.
Oh, wow.
Nothing but cornfield around it.
Yeah.
There was no stores. There was no 7-Elevens. You're out there. I went to a church called Word of Life Christian Center, and was the only African American there, and they welcomed me, and we kind of spent the bulk of our time there in that church, an hour away, and we went morning and evening service and during the midweek. And
why would you drive an hour?
We probably just didn't know any better.
Okay.
Yeah, we probably just, we again, this was the days before internet. You couldn't just go and look up a church.
Right.
You hear about a church, somebody tells you about a church. Oh, where's it at? Well, it's an hour. Okay, well, we just go. Even when it was snow and ice, because you were in Ohio, right? And snow and ice on the ground, we would leave 2.5 hours early. And we just creep, at 30 miles an hour until we made it to church, and we creep back. And that was just our dedication to church. And our kids were all babies. Ricky was born in that church. Keisha was born in that church. Um, and they were all in carriers and strollers at the time. And we hung out with those people.
Let's talk about ministry. So, Japan, you mentioned that you started a church. And this is a few years after you became a Christian?
Yeah.
How did your ministry journey begin, and what's it been like since?
A lot of learning. Um, you know, I wasn't the pastor when we started. Uh, there was a lot of learning there because everything that I had learned in Brooklyn, New York, I brought with me.
Okay.
And a lot of it did fit because the majority of the people, and we started with only about 6 or 7 people, but they were all African American, with the exception of my wife. She was probably the only non-African American. And so the culture and the tradition of how we did church all kind of fit. And so, it was a good fit for me. However, I felt something different. At this time, the Lord had not called me, or he was calling me, but I hadn't answered.
Right.
So I'm just going to church, but I'm very active. I'm doing everything. I'm the deacon. I'm the
The
finance
treasurer,
guy. I'm the
secretary.
admin. I'm doing everything because there's only 7 of us, right? So I'm doing everything. And after being there for about a year is when I just felt a call to ministry. And my pastor at the time, once I went and told him, he kind of knew it. He says, "Yeah, I can see that on you." But ministry for me was different because I fought that calling because I'm thinking, Lord, you don't need me. You already got thousands of ministers out there. You got thousands of pastors out. You don't need me. Who am I? I'm just another number. But when I finally got to the point where I says, "Man, I just feel this call, and I just feel it so strong." And the one thing that I felt was going to be different, which is really not different, but at least at that time I thought it was going to be different, that I was going to teach God's word in a way that people, number one, could easily understand it, and number two, it would be applicable to their everyday life.
Mm.
And although when we go to seminary, that's what we learn, that the Bible is supposed to be taught so that it's applicable, and it is supposed to be taught in a way that people could easily understand it. Jesus did it because he spoke in parables. That was the
Right.
reason why he did what he did. But to me, that was during that time, that was a revelation. Um, and so my teaching in the beginning of, when I would share, and I didn't share that often in the beginning, but when they gave me opportunity, it was always very thought out, very structured, and it had an end game. That what the Lord is really saying is this, and this is how it applies to your everyday life. And that's kind of been my momentum over
Yeah.
the years, right? Even up until now.
Absolutely.
It's this is the truth of God's word, no matter what you heard. And as a result of that, this is how your life needs to change.
I mean, you get kicked off of Facebook for saying the truth about God's word. So
It was only once, I think, and I don't even know what I said. Actually, that sermon, I don't think that I said anything
you
that
probably said the
was
Bible was true. That's probably what you said.
something like that. But if that's the case, then none of our stuff should be on Facebook because I say that every Sunday.
So you started a church in Japan. You're serving in Ohio. What did you do in Ohio in terms of ministry?
In Ohio, so I started church in Japan. In that church in Japan, I was ordained as an elder eventually and became one of the associate pastors. And then in Ohio, when I got to Ohio, I was an elder, but they didn't embrace me as an elder.
Mhm.
And so, I'm at the church. I'm the only African American there. And there's a good story behind that. I'm the only African American there. The pastor says, "Hey, we realize that you're a pastor and you're an elder, but, here, not yet." I was like, "Okay, I wasn't asking. I wasn't asking
Yeah.
to be a pastor elder."
Yeah.
So after about 6 months or so, he ordained me as a deacon.
Wow.
And he already had elders there. So he had elders there, and I was the only deacon. So he ordained me as a deacon. And I think he was just being respectful of what I had done in ministry prior to arriving there at the church. But here was the kicker. every time he was out of town, I was the one that was going to speak.
Right.
Every time he was out of town, he was like, going to be out of town for the next couple of weeks. Brother Rick is going to bring the messages.
How'd it go?
Went well.
Yeah.
Simple messages. I don't even remember where I was getting my messages from at the time. But somehow, some way, I was getting messages, and somehow, some way, he felt or saw something that allowed me as the deacon to bring the messages above and beyond his elders.
It's a little different in those kind of contexts.
Very different. I didn't realize it at the time.
Right.
But looking back, I was like, the elders couldn't preach. And I was the only deacon, so it wasn't like there was only like 2 or 3 of us that could preach. I was the only one. So very interesting. So it was in Hawaii, in Ohio, left Ohio, and went back to Korea again. But this time I couldn't take my family. And they had to stay. Keisha was 9 months old. And I called the Department of the Army and I says, hey, I didn't want to leave. My kids were all young. They were 9 months. They were 9 months, year and a half, and 2.5 or something like that. I called the Department of the Army and I asked them, I says, hey, can I get out of this assignment? And they said, we can extend you a year. We can let you stay in place for a year, but after that year, you're going back to Korea. So they said, you can either go now or you can go later. So I opted to go now because I wanted to be home when Tavane started to go to school.
Right.
I wanted, when she came home, when she started going to school, I wanted to be her home. So I took the assignment and left my family back in the States because they didn't allow for your families to come with you. And I did a whole year over in Korea. And there got connected with church. And wound up being the assistant pastor for 2 churches at the same time, just to keep myself busy,
right,
and to keep myself from the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because here I'm in another country,
by yourself.
I'm away from my family.
Mm-hmm.
I had my own apartment,
Mm-hmm.
had my own car. It would have been very easy for me. And anytime you're around a military base, there's clubs and women and everything in between. Mm-hmm. And so I said, you know what, I'm here for a year. I'm just going to try to focus and just get into the word. And just when I go back, I want to be a super house for God.
Right.
And so I wound up being assistant pastor for 2 churches at the same time. And it kept me busy for the whole year. I'm teaching Bible study at both churches. I'm teaching Sunday school at both churches. I'm preaching at both churches. I mean, just all kinds of stuff. And it kept me busy. And ran into my pastor, Dr. Gregory Cruel, at the time, was very instrumental in posturing me for growth. And his famous term used to be, I'm going to stretch you. And he would put me in places that would stretch me. So he was a very, very well-renowned speaker. People wanted him to speak. And so he would get calls to come speak at different occasions. And he would say, no, I can't make it, but I'm going to send you somebody. And he would send me. Mm-hmm. And he would say, no, I'm not going to be at that conference, but I'm going to send you somebody.
Right.
And that was his way of stretching me, because he put me in places that I had not been before. And it made me come up to the standard. It made me, I had to grow. And so that was I would say, one of the beginnings of very measurable growth spiritually for me. And so when I came back from overseas and reunited with my family. They were in Vegas at the time. I had relocated them to Vegas. We go back to Vegas. My wife is active in the church there in Vegas. The pastor sees me. It was a non-African American church, and he lets me speak one time. And he was on a corner. He was in a strip mall on a corner right by a gas station. And you can hear, when you're preaching, you can hear it. And he had a glass window, so you can kind of peek in and see. So I'm preaching one time for him, and people are coming to the window, and people are coming in. And so he's like, hey, people coming, and the congregation likes it. So he put me up for the whole month.
Wow.
They had 2 services. They had a morning and an evening. I preached all 8 services for a whole month because I was there for a month for vacation. He says, hey.
He took a break.
He took a break. He says, you do this.
Yeah.
And the response of the people, and by the gas station there, people were hearing Americans were coming in now, blacks were coming in. He said, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to put you on staff. He says, I'm offering you a position right now. I says, I can't. I says, I'm in the military. I'm on orders.
Yeah. I'm
just here on vacation to pick them up, but we're going to Hawaii. Right. And he says, but we're going to make you this offer. I says, I can't do that. I work for the government. So he says, well, we'll keep in touch when you get to Hawaii. So we get to Hawaii, we kept in touch, and same thing kind of happened. Where he called and he says, hey, there's a lady over there that I know that's not going to church. And we connected with the lady and we brought her to our house. And just my wife and I and her would just have Bible study. And her husband was unsaved. And then because she couldn't drive and he was driving her, well, he would have to come with her. And eventually, after about the 4th or 5th Bible study, he got saved.
Right.
And then she worked in a hotel and she started inviting her friends. And they were all maids at the hotel. And so the maids would come, and we had a van, so I would go and pick them up because they didn't have transportation. And once a week, bring them to the house, and we'd have Bible study. People started getting saved.
Wow.
People started getting saved. And so I'm calling this church that I was affiliated with back in Vegas, and I said, hey, you need to send somebody out here because there's a bunch of people getting saved. You need to send a pastor. And they said, no, you just keep doing what you're doing. You just keep doing it. And then we started having, they would take their little tips and they would, give little money, and then we buy food and we feed lunch. And eventually they said, let's have a service on a Sunday. And so we moved all the furniture out of our little living room and we set up chairs there and we had like a little service. And I'm calling the place. I'm saying, hey, you want to send somebody over here because now they want to have a Sunday service. You need to get a pastor over here. And they said, you just keep doing what you're doing. And things began to grow, and next thing you know,
and that's how the Hawaii church was born.
That's how the Hawaii church.
You were a church planner through and through.
People say that, but I don't feel called to do that. You just right. It's such a hard job. Yeah, it is a hard job. I mean, you put in a situation to do. But I've learned so much from that, and those are a lot of the nuggets that I want as we go through this video cast podcast, to really focus on, because I've learned so many things that Bible college didn't teach me.
Yeah. I'm really excited about you sharing from your life and your experience on this podcast. So then God leads you guys from Hawaii to Sachse.
We stayed in Hawaii. We never thought that we would move from Hawaii. We was in the military, was on a special assignment, got handpicked to go to Hawaii because it was a special assignment. It was we handled all of the communications for the White House and the president. Mm-hmm. So it was really a handpick. Mm-hmm. And so got favored to do that. And we're in Hawaii, and now I was coming up for promotion again. And I intentionally did not submit my promotion packet. And I kept it hush hush because I knew that I'm probably going to get promoted. But I didn't submit the package. So the deadline comes and all the packets are in. Somehow, some way, my commander found out that I didn't submit my packet. And I get a call. I was off that day. And he says, you come in my office immediately. I knew I was in trouble. So I put my uniform on and went to the office, and he's chewing me up and down. Why did you not submit your packet? You would have got promoted. You're in the we had primary zones and secondary zones. You're in the primary zone for promotion. You would have got promoted. And I said, sir, I don't want to get promoted. He said, why not? Doesn't make sense. Why would you not want to get promoted? I said, what would you do with me when I got promoted? He said, we're going to send you to the Pentagon. They've been asking for you.
Right.
I said, I don't want to go to the Pentagon. My kids are small. It's too expensive. It's back in the city. My church is here. I don't want to go to the Pentagon. well, that's where they need you. I said, I don't want to go. That's why I didn't submit the packet. I knew if I submitted the packet, I knew I would get promoted. I knew that's where I was going. I had colleagues back there saying, Rick, we're already ready for you, blah, 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 blah. I don't want to go to the Pentagon. I don't want to raise my kids in that environment. My church is here. And so he says, okay, well, you got two choices. You either you're either going to PCS, or in other words, you're going to take a move, or you're going to retire.
Wow.
Because I already had enough years. I said, I'll retire.
Dang.
So I did another.
Wow.
And it was really timing, God's timing, because at that point where I had that conversation with him, I could retire. I couldn't retire then, but they couldn't move me anymore.
Right.
Because I didn't want to move. Anything less than 2 years, the government will not spend the money to relocate you, because they're not just moving you, they're moving you, your family, your household goods, your cars, they're moving everything. It's a lot of money. So you got to have at least 2 years left for them to move you. So I only had 18 months left.
Wow.
So they could not move me.
Providence.
And so yeah, we had purchased a home in Hawaii by the help and the grace of God and some of the people there, because we wasn't making enough money to buy a home in Hawaii. And the Hawaii church, when I did my time in the military, when I got out, they offered me a package. They said, hey, we want you to be full-time. We want you to be our pastor. The church had grown from the one person to probably at that point, we were a couple of hundred. And they gave me a package and they said, hey, we want you to stay here. I was the only African-American in the church. Well, me and my kids.
Wow.
Wow. And so there I really learned that church, those people taught me some things that are gold.
Yeah.
Because they loved me through the mistakes.
Right.
And even though none of them looked like me,
right,
they treated me like family.
Yeah.
Oh, the stuff that they taught me, there's no price. Seminary couldn't teach you, Bible college can't teach you this stuff. It's how to connect with people. And how to connect with people that don't look like you or think like you or have a culture like you. Whatever, and I'll use in quotes, success that there may be in what God is doing through the pursuit or through the Hawaii church, a lot of that I attribute to what those people taught me through their love and their grace, and what God did through that church in Hawaii.
Absolutely.
Because we grew. This was before the days of internet.
Right.
We had no internet.
No website.
We had no website. We didn't have any of that. But it was the power of God and the word of mouth. And 99% of the people that got saved in that church, that was their first church they got saved in. So we weren't getting Christians from other churches. We were getting non-believers that were coming in and getting saved. And they would go back and tell their non-believing friends, and they would bring them and they would get saved. So 99% of the people got birthed in that church. And I'm shooting way ahead. That was in 1995 when we started. That church is still in existence today. When we left there 14 plus years ago to come here, actually 15 years ago to come here, they remained with no pastor and no building for 15 years and still existed and still exist today.
The fruit remains.
The fruit, different kind of fruit though.
Right.
Because in today's church, what church do you know today that will survive 15 years with no building and no pastor?
I've never heard of a church.
Never heard of it.
Yeah.
But that was the closeness.
Right.
And the unity of the church, that for 15 years, you have no pastor and no building.
I bet they missed their pastor though.
Yeah. Well, I came back into their life maybe about 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And we didn't leave because it was a problem per se. Right. We just left because, okay, next steps in life.
God's calling.
And so the arms were always open. 5 years after we moved here to Texas, one of the youth that were there at the time, they were dating, and he said, Pastor, if I ever get married, I want you to come back and marry me. And 5 years later, I get an invite. He's getting married.
Unreal.
And so I went back after 5 years of being here, 5 years of not seeing them.
Yeah.
And I must have cried a half a dozen times.
You?
Yes.
You're a cold-blooded Terminator.
No, I'm not a cold-blooded Terminator. It was just one big reunion.
Yeah.
They rolled out the red carpet for me, and you would have thought that the President of the United States came. Just so much love.
There is, I want to pause right there. There is something beautiful about a people who love their pastor and a pastor who loves their people. We live in a day and age, especially here in mainland, right? The States here in mainland, and there's an unfortunate transactional nature to pastoral ministry that the membership and its pastors they're not married like we once were.
Yeah.
They're not together and unified. It's like your theological position might hold us together, but to see churches marked by love, it's not as common as maybe it once was, or maybe as we would hope, according to what we would see in the text. And so it is unbelievable and encouraging to hear. That's exactly what you.
Oh my gosh. That's not,
it's not normal.
I think it's not normal because society makes it not normal.
Right.
So I think society pushes us to to the mega church is the model of the church that people want to be a part of, or that society looks at and checks it off as being successful because it's thousands of people. I don't see it that way. And I nothing against the mega church.
Of course.
What I see is that if Jesus was here today, he'd be in jeans, t-shirts, and sneakers, and he'd be walking around talking to people.
Yeah.
I think what we've taught in some traditions or in some settings or even in some cultures, we've taught that the pastor should be far away from the people.
Right, the ivory tower.
Right, and we separate, and so you can never talk to the pastor. And I understand the intention of that, but I think in certain circles we've taken it too far.
Agreed.
Right, there's a place for that, but then we've taken it way, 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 way too far. I actually went to a church in San Jose, California. I was there for a couple of months doing some training, and this was back in the 90s. I go and I visit this church. I'm there for training. I go and I visit it on a Sunday. I went during the week to find it, and then I went Sunday to go visit it. So I walk in, and huge church, nice building and everything. There had to be about less than 10 people in the service. Of course, I'm the visitor. Everybody knew that.
Right.
The lady comes to me and she says, "Hey, pastor wants to talk to you, that you're the visitor." I said, "Oh, okay." So she takes me to his office.
There's 10 people at this church. They got the secretary coming to grab
Yes, that's my point. Now watch this. She takes me to this office.
Y'all are crazy out there.
She knocks on the door. He says, "Come in."
Oh my gosh.
She brings me in.
Oh my gosh.
She introduces me to him, and he says to her, "That's not the way I taught you to do it. Walk out and do it again."
Oh, that's why it's true.
We walk out
oh my gosh.
of his office, close the door, and she does it again.
What is wrong with him? What's wrong with her?
This is what. So he gave me his card.
He has a card?
He has a card.
He got 10 people. All right.
His card said,
Yeah,
CEO.
Dang.
And I'll never forget that because, now this was back in the 90s. I'll never forget that because I think in some circles today, this is what we're teaching new kingdom leaders. The church is a business. And that it ought to be structured and it ought to be business-fied like your business is. It is a business. It's a soul business, but it runs in a whole different kingdom.
Right.
A whole different perspective. And so, as you know, here at the Pursuit and other places, I was never like that.
Right.
I love being in the lobby greeting people. I stand at the back door every service. I love greeting people.
do.
I know, and even some of the leaders said, "Pastor, you can't stay back there because you got other people that want to talk." But I just love, love, because this is how we connect with people.
Right.
It's during those times of connections, and I think this is a great point for pastors that are planning churches, smaller churches. Don't separate yourself from your people.
Right.
Because the things that you're teaching that your people need, you need that too.
That's so true.
We keep saying you need the fellowship, you need unity, you need accountability, you need people that you can vet. I need that too.
Say that.
Because I'm a Christian first.
Right.
Forget the title.
Right.
I need unity. I need accountability. I need fellow. I need all of that. So don't separate yourself. Those times when I'm standing at the door, at the lobby, and people are talking, even that quick, a lot of times you see me praying for them right there because those are times that we get to connect and to pray and to meet needs. Maybe that they were too shy to come to the altar.
Right.
Or they just wanted that personal time with me, just whatever. And so I think that's been one of the, I'm not going to say it's unique because I know it's a lot of churches out there that do it. But I think for us, there is everybody that has come to the pursuit. One of the takeaways has been, man, I'm trying to walk out the door. Right. I keep getting stopped.
Right.
I've seen people that says, yeah, well, I got to go. And 30 minutes later, I see a third couple has already stopped them and they're engaged again. And I just really think that that's what God wants in his family.
God takes you guys from Hawaii, leads you to Sachse, and you guys start a church. I mean, it's just in your blood at this point. You can't get away from it. Like, what happened?
I had no intentions of starting a church. I felt called to lead a church, but not to start another one. They're too hard to start.
Sure.
It was just difficult. And maybe some of that is me and my personality and pouring my life into what I wanted to do. And you and I have been around each other long enough to know, I think you know enough about me. I just don't like to do anything any kind of way.
Right.
And so with that comes all the details and all the effort and all the energies. And so I didn't want to, so we attended a church here locally at first. And that's probably a story for another time.
Sure.
But we were there for a couple of years, and then the call was, even though I didn't want to start a church, I will say that my wife, her gifting is prayer.
Yes.
And she journals her prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me that I would start a church, and I told her she was crazy. And I told her the only way that I would start a church is if Jesus came off his throne and came down and sat next to me. But she journaled it in her Bible the day that she felt the Lord told her, and she journaled it, and it even said where it would be.
Crazy.
It said where it would be. She never showed it to me.
Right.
A couple of years later.
Right.
The Lord told her how many years it would take for it to happen.
That's crazy.
And he said 2 years. Almost 2 years to the date. I'm going to start a church.
I am so grateful that she heard from God, that you guys started this church. This is, Sachse is my hometown, and to have a multi-ethnic, multi-generational. I mean, you've got old heads, white hair, gray hair, receding hairlines,
no
hair, and then you got fresh fades, and you got teenagers, and you got 7-year-olds and retirees, and black, white, Hispanic, Filipino, Asian. I mean, just
Indian.
I mean, languages and cultures and generations in Sachse, of all places.
Of all places.
You are one of the only multi-ethnic churches in DFW. And it is such an honor and a privilege to be a part of this amazing community committed to the scriptures. Mm-hmm. As you're talking, and when I'm thinking about our church, I'm thinking about Acts chapter 2.
Mm-hmm.
They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and the breaking of bread and prayers, and awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles, and all who believed were together and had all things in common. And I just am so, I mean, you just see your story, you hear your story, you hear your narrative, and you can see your fingerprints, the culture, and the beauty and the identity that you guys, your fingerprints are all over this church. It's God's fingerprints through yours, all over this church. And so I'm excited about this podcast, Real Talk with Pastor Rick, taking our faith from Sunday to every day, because in this church, in this diverse, multi-ethnic communities, multi-generational community, different issues rise up. Marriage issues, parenting, dating, finance, career, mental health, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, ideation, theological issues, because we're always in the Bible, right? Demons, angels, heaven, hell, eternity, the Bible, and I'm just so excited that we get to journey with this
Mhm.
incredible audience, to
Yeah.
journey with you, to pick your brain, to dig into the scriptures together with you, and even pull from your own life. And so, as we wrap up our conversation today, Pastor Rick, what would you say? What do you want the people listening to walk away with, maybe from your own testimony or your hopes for this podcast in the
Mhm.
time to come?
I want people to walk away with opening their heart and their mind to maybe seeing or hearing or even experiencing something that you've never experienced before. And what I mean by that is we grow up in our own churches, in our own circles, in our own little silos, and we think if it's not like this,
Mm,
it's not right.
right.
And what I'm here to tell you is that God works outside of that.
That's right.
And so there's so many things for us to learn. I want you to walk away with learning and growing how to do something in a different way, or maybe how to take some nuggets here and there and apply them to your own life, whether it's in the area of planting, leading a church, marriage, or whatever it may be, and watch God do wonders because we're always growing and we're always developing together.
I'm excited to hear that. So, Pastor Rick, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And then, audience, I just want to say this. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, drop comments, and do us a favor. If you have our phone numbers or email, contact Pastor Rick. DM us. Let us know what you thought about the episode, what your questions are, what are some episodes that we can create to help answer some of the questions that maybe you're wrestling with as you take your faith from Sunday to every day. So, we'll talk to you soon.